G'day and welcome to another episode of Built by Dan and yet another installment in the GT40 kit build series. In today's episode, I'm going to be working on the paneling for the rear firewall. That includes this engine access cover plate as well as this upper section that houses the rear window. It's a lot of drilling and tapping this episode, but stay tuned. I do have some exciting updates for the build later on in the episode. So I've already mocked up or pre-installed or clamped in place the panels for this installment. I'll start with the engine access panel. The manufacturer has already threaded all the screw mounting points in the actual chassis itself, but has only drilled the top 6 screws into the access panel. So there are another 6 screws that need to go around the bottom edge, and that's what I'll still need to drill out in this episode. Basically I've installed it so I can then go around the back, mark from the rear through the threaded hole where the location of those mounting points are, and then I can drill through the cover panel. When it comes to this top panel for the rear window, the manufacturer has pre-drilled some holes, but the holes are too small for the screws, but they are the perfect size to use as a guide for drilling the holes in that top tube of the chassis so that I can tap the thread into them. So before I drill out the holes, I'm going to use that as my guide. I'm going to drill through that top tube so I can tap those threads, and then I can drill out the hole in this panel to be larger to allow the bolt or the screw to pass through it. Once that's all done, I'll then remove that panel and I'll look at aligning the window surround. So there's an aluminium surround that goes around that window and a Perspex window that goes in there. So that'll be the last step to get this rear panel all fabricated. And then I'll look to grab my roof spider from over here on the pallet in the back of the garage. I'm gonna have to find somewhere where I can store that windscreen for the time being without it getting broken. And I'll be looking to then move that across, place it on the chassis so that I can look at what's involved in installing that. It's fairly simple at the front. It just bolts into that top panel in front of the dash. But at the rear here, the internal skin of that roof spider needs to be trimmed for the roll bar and for this rear panel. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to need to do to achieve that, but that's why I need to get this installed, get the roof spider over here, and then I can work out where to go from there. I think it's just going to be a lot of trimming of that internal panel, just trim, test fit, trim, test fit. But without these panels in place, it's pretty hard to tell what I'm going to need. So it may even need a couple of attempts, one to do the roll bar without the panel in place, and then install the panel and work out what more needs to be taken out, or whether I cut a separate slot for that aluminium firewall panel. Okay, so I was going to start with marking the holes for this engine access panel, but I realised I've got these clamps sticking out in the engine bay, which kind of get in my way of climbing in there and marking them from the rear. So I'm going to jump in here and drill out these holes for this top panel first. Then I can remove that, the clamps are out of my way, and I can get access to the engine bay to mark up those holes. So that last hole just had the solid aluminium block for the roll bar in there. I'm just concerned it wasn't deep enough, so I've just drilled into that a little bit just to give myself a little bit of clearance. I don't think the screws are too long. I'm just going to go and grab one just to double check to make sure I don't need to drill out a little bit more at either end. Okay, I've just had a look at the length of the screws that go in here. It looks like they'll be the perfect length to just almost just touch or just be clear of those aluminium blocks. So I'm happy with that. With all those holes drilled out, I can remove this panel now and I'll start tapping the threads behind, and then I'll climb into the engine bay later and fix up this panel. So the hole size that I drilled was 4mm, and that's so that I can tap, or not, so I can tap a 1024 thread. I'll need to get a different tap handle for it. I was hoping I could use that one because it's a hell of a lot easier, but looks like with the angle of that panel it's not going to work. Okay, I've switched over my tap handle now and I should be able to get the rest of these done pretty quickly. I suppose one other thing to note while I'm doing this is I just had to sand down the welds slightly, just so that the panel could sit down flush with the bottom of this top tube. Without it, it was just a bit too bumpy and it restricted my ability to lower the panel in line with this tube. Okay, that's it for them. Now, once I install that again, I do actually need to install the pivot bolts for the seat belt. So the retractor mounts down here. It then comes up to this point. That actually needs, it has quite a large spacer or bushing that will need to stick through this aluminium panel. So I'll need to work out how I can best mark that hole so that I can core a hole just the right size for that bushing to poke through, and hopefully keep it all centered. I'll save that for a little bit. I'm going to move on to this engine access panel now. So as I mentioned earlier, the thread's already been tapped into the chassis panel here. I basically just need to transfer those locations across onto the panel so I can drill the hole through for the screw. So I'm just using a lead pencil to trace around that hole so I can find the center. I just don't want to put anything else in there that might damage the thread that's already been tapped. Okay, that's all of them. I'll go and remove the panel from the other side, and I should then be able to center punch those holes and drill them out. All right, it's always nice when things go together properly the first time. I did try and, well, I didn't try, I actually drilled out the holes in the panel slightly larger, just half a millimeter larger than what I normally would. Basically I'm using metric drill bits even though I'm using imperial screws. I measured about 4.8 millimeters for the screw. Usually I would drill a 5mm hole. I decided to go with a 5.5mm hole just to give myself a little bit more room to play, and it all bolted up perfectly, which I'm really happy about. So with that now all sorted, I'm going to move on to drilling out the holes for the window surround. There's already holes in the surround. I just need to transfer them across to this bulkhead panel, and that will then be it for this rear firewall. So I drilled my first few holes just with the two panels clamped together to keep them aligned. But as I suspected, the clamps were always going to get in the way. I was hoping to get a couple more, but I didn't want to twist the clamps around too much and change the alignment. So I've stopped after those first 4 holes, and I've inserted and tightened the bolts that go in there. And now that those bolts are holding it in place with those first few holes, I'll go and remove the clamps, and now I should be able to drill out the rest of the holes, and it should keep my alignment nicely. So I've got the surround just temporarily fitted. I've just put sort of 4 bolts in, just one at each end and in the middle, top and bottom, just to hold it in place, keeps it out of the way. I'm not going to put all the bolts in, and I'm not going to install the Perspex window because I'm just worried about it getting damaged or scratched and whatever, whilst I play around with the rest of it and try and get everything else fitted around it. So that'll be something that'll go in towards the end. But for now, I am going to bolt this back onto the chassis, and then I'm going to go and grab the roof spider so I can start looking at what's going to need to be done to trim the inside of that spider to fit it over the roll bar and this bulkhead panel. Okay, that's it, all fitted off. I'm going to just tidy up a little bit and go and rearrange the doors and the windscreen on the pallet up in the back of the garage, and then I'll bring the spider over and place it here on the chassis so we can see what's going to be involved in trimming it. All right, I've got the spider just sitting in front of where it needs to sit, and straight away I can see it looks like there's quite a bit that's going to need to be trimmed. You can see that top corner of that bulkhead panel, far too high, and even the width doesn't quite look right. Now it is sitting a fair way forward compared to where it needs to be. For reference, you can probably just see there's a temporary screw hole at the rear of the pillar. and it should actually align with that hole there on the inside of the pillar. So there's probably about 150 mil that it needs to come back, but even then, I can't see us getting anywhere near that fitting in based on its current height. The other thing I've noticed, which hopefully it'll all come together once it all sits back, is that, I'm sitting down a bit too low there, but you can see there the window surround isn't even within the cabin. So again, there is a slight fall down at the back of the roof. I'm hoping once that moves back into position where it should be, that will then have enough clearance that that window actually fits, or the window surround actually fits inside the cabin. So I can see I'm probably going to have to start with that bulkhead panel removed, and then start looking at what I need to do to trim to get the spider to sit over the roll bar. So when it comes to trimming, it's this inside panel here. You can sort of see where there's two panels that have been joined together, an inside and an outside. The inside panel needs to be trimmed so that it fits over the roll bar. It looks like in the middle there probably wouldn't be too much clearance required, but on the corners, the rounded part of the roll bar are definitely going to need some clearance. You can see they stick out quite a bit compared to the body. So that's what's going to be installed for next episode. I'm going to start playing around with that, starting to trim that inside layer of fiberglass and try and get this spider back into position where it needs to be before I pull apart the roll bar and get all these tubes powder coated. There's no point setting them out for powder coat now and losing them for a week or two, and then I can't really progress too much more in getting the spider fitted. So after all that, I forgot to film my outro. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to everybody who commented, shared your thoughts on the powder coat colour for the roll bar, rear stays and rear brace tubes on the GT40. I think it landed at the moment at about 45% votes towards black, and second was orange at about 27%. That's where it's currently sitting anyway. I'm still not sure which way I want to go. Black was where I was originally leaning, until someone mentioned, why don't you just keep it gold and either redo the gold zinc coating or powder coat them gold to match. That would just be keeping with the original theme of the gold zinc and raw aluminium contrast. So not sure which way I'm going to go just yet. I think what I'd like to do is wait until I get my engine and have that sitting in the engine bay and just see how either black or orange or gold or whatever colour would either contrast or clash with the engine once it's in there. Speaking of which, I said I had some exciting news, so let's cut to it. So as you can see, I have my crate engine. I have some accessories for the engine sitting on top. You obviously know that I got my Graziano transaxle quite some time ago. In fact, that arrived before my GT40 kit arrived. I've also received another package from the manufacturer. So I have my adapter plate so I can bolt the transaxle up to the engine, and I have engine and transaxle mounts. So stay tuned. It probably won't be the next episode, but within the next couple of episodes, I will be assembling that engine and transaxle and test fitting it into the engine bay. So that's it for this episode. It's a fairly short one, fairly simple one, bolting a couple of panels on, but it is critical to being able to move ahead and starting to get the body fitted. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment and let me know what you think.